My name is Kylie McElrath. I'll be your facilitator today. I want to welcome you to Audubon Great Lakes and My Birds webinar, Winter Waterfowl ID, Part 2, Geese and Swans, in partnership with Ducks Unlimited and the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for spending the next hour with us. We're hoping this webinar will be helpful because we know the physical and mental health benefits of experiencing engaging with public lands and making the outdoors safe and welcoming for everyone. And even in the heart of winter, our weird and wonderful winter waterfowl help keep us entertained wherever they can find open water across the Great Lakes, making it an excellent time to go birding. I'm the conservation manager for Michigan with Audubon Great Lakes, and I help support the My Birds program, which is an outreach and engagement program presented by Michigan DNR's Wildlife Division and Audubon Great Lakes. Audubon Great Lakes is a regional office of National Audubon, and we work across the 5 Great Lakes states to restore and protect birds and the places they need to thrive through on-the-ground conservation, outreach, engagement, policy, and advocacy. We have over 215,000 active members, with 43,000 members here in Michigan, and over 50 chapters and 2 nature centers. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Our communications associate, Erin Ford, will be monitoring the chat box and will help to facilitate the Q&A session at the end of the program. This presentation is being recorded. All participants will be muted for the duration of the webinar. Please take a moment to locate the participant and chat function on the Zoom platform to actively participate in the webinar. To send a question or comment to the facilitator, please use the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat box throughout this webinar, so please be respectful and appropriate while participating in this webinar. We will review questions that you've submitted in the chat box during the Q&A session, and questions will be answered at the end. And now I'll take a moment to introduce our guest speakers. In addition to myself today, you'll be hearing from John Coluccy, Director of Conservation Planning with Ducks Unlimited, and Patrick Doran, Midwest Director of Strategy, Measures, and Science with the Nature Conservancy. Today we'll be chatting all about winter birding and waterfowl ID. We will be learning specifically about geese and swans, how to identify them, where to find them, and tips on how to best observe them. You'll also learn about conservation of these waterfowl and their habitats across Michigan and opportunities for you to get involved. This webinar is part 2 in our series on winter waterfowl. Part 1 focused on dabbling ducks and diving ducks, which we encourage you to go back and watch. You'll find the link in the chat. So a little bit about winter birding. Not all Michigan birds fly south for the winter. Some species remain in Michigan year-round, such as our northern cardinals and mallards. Michigan also welcomes many new visitors from the north in the colder months. In Michigan and across the Great Lakes, dozens of waterfowl species descend upon our open waters and wetlands each winter, making it an excellent time to hone your waterfowl ID skills. For those of you that are familiar with Bird and Moon Comics' 4 Seasons of Birdwatching comic, you may know that winter is officially weird duck time. And I'll pass things over to John Coluccy, who will share information on how to identify our winter geese and swans.
Thanks, Kylie, and good afternoon, everybody. We'll start off with just the general description of what are waterfowl. And when we're talking about waterfowl, they're a very diverse group of species that are lumped into 3 general groups, and those include the ducks, geese, and swans. As their name implies, waterfowl are uniquely adapted to aquatic environments, and one notable adaptation that they have that's obvious is web feet. Generally, they are large, conspicuous aquatic birds, so they're easy to sight and see, a little bit better than looking for a hummingbird in open areas, obviously, and they're also commonly game birds. Next slide, please. There are many other bird species that inhabit aquatic habitats that are closely related to waterfowl, but they are not considered waterfowl. Among these are grebes, like the pied-billed grebe you see there, American coots in the lower left, double-crested cormorants in the lower right, and loons, represented by the common loon in the upper right. Next slide, please. So North American waterfowl are represented by 8 groups: the swans, the geese, whistling ducks, dabbling ducks, perching ducks, diving ducks, stiff-tails, and sea ducks. However, today we'll just be focusing on swans, geese, and whistling ducks, as the other species were covered, the other groups and species were covered in the last webinar. Next slide. There are several important keys you can use to help identify waterfowl when you're out and about, and other birds. And these include knowing something about a species range. So in relation to where you are, do those birds overlap with that area? And also the habitats that they use. Are you in a forested wetland, or are you in a cluster and emergent wetland, or are you in an open water area, deeper water, open area? And then thinking also about when the birds are present in your area, in your space and time. And so having some range maps and understanding their migration timing when they're in the area. Also, flight behavior can be very important as well when they're flying. Are the wing beats fast, or are they slow? When they leave the water in flight and flush, do they leap off the water, or do they have to paddle to gain flight? Also, foraging behavior. Do they tip up to feed, or do they submerge and dive to forage on the bottom of the wetland? And then we come up with morphology: size, shape, and posture. What do they look like from a silhouette? And of course, we get into bill shape. There's a wide diversity in bill shapes, from the northern shoveler on down to the mergansers that have a very serrated and pointy bill for catching fish. And you can learn something about the hind toe if you can see it, if it's out of the water. For diving ducks and sea ducks, the hind toe is very different than that of a dabbling duck and the geese. And then leg placement. Are the legs up under the body, which makes them more at ease in terrestrial upland environments, or are they far back on the body, like a diving duck or a sea duck? And then, of course, we get down to the colors. The color of the bill can be very definitive. The color of the eyes, if you can see them. And of course, plumage colors are very, very important. Next slide. Okay, before we jump into the species for today, I do want to note that whistling ducks, geese, and swans are all monochromatic, meaning that the males and females are similar in plumage appearance. In addition, males tend to be a little bit larger than females, but the only real way to tell them apart is via a cloacal examination. And typically when we ban these species, put leg bands on them for research projects, we do that and assign a sex. Okay, with that, let's jump into the species. The first two that we're going to cover are whistling ducks. And as you can see from the distribution maps, it's very highly unlikely that you're going to encounter these in Michigan. But black-bellied whistling ducks have been observed recently as far north as Illinois and Tennessee. So if climate keeps warming, we may see these guys up in our area. Okay, so starting with the fulvous whistling duck on the left, the key characteristics we're looking for with this species include the ivory edge side flank feathers that form a striking border between the sides and back, and a distinctive white V that separates the brownish black tail from the dark colored back. The bill, legs, and feet are blue-gray, and the wing is dark along the entire boundary. Moving on to the black-bellied whistling duck, the key characteristic here to look for includes the black belly, for which the species is named, which is contrasted by a chestnut nape, lower neck, chest, and back. Also a bright orange bill and long pink legs. And in flight, white extends the length of the wing, as you can see in the flight picture down below. And I do want to note, when I talked earlier about the terrestrial aspect, and the leg placement on these species, all of these species, the whistling ducks, the geese, and the swans, their leg placement is more up under their bodies, so they're quite at home both on land and in the water. Next slide, please. Okay, next up, we have the white-cheeked geese, which include cackling geese and Canada geese. There is tremendous variability in size among the 11 subspecies or races of these two groups. The four races that make up Cackling geese range in size from about 3 to 6 pounds, while the 7 larger races that make up Canada geese range from 7 on up to 20 pounds, with the giant Canada goose, which you probably see around here year-round, being the largest of those. And of course, key characteristics to look for, everybody knows what these guys look like, the black bill and head and neck with that distinctive white cheek patch or chin strap, and the body is brownish with a bright white rump. Next slide, please. Next up, we have the light geese, including the lesser and greater snow goose and the Ross's goose. Lesser and greater snow geese are very similar, but there is a size discrepancy. Lesser snow geese weigh between 4 to 6 pounds, while greater snow geese weigh between 6 and 7 pounds. The key characteristics here include an all-white body with black primary feathers and a large grinning patch, kind of that black gap that you see the arrow pointing to there. The lesser snow goose does have a blue phase that is denoted by a white head with a blue-gray body in the upper right there. And that blue phase of the lesser snow goose is controlled by a single dominant gene. And so when you cross a white snow goose with a white snow goose, you get white offspring. When you cross a blue phase goose, pure, with a white phase, you get blue offspring. And when you have a blue by blue, you get blue and white offspring. So quite diverse. The Ross's goose in the lower right there is much smaller in size, about 3 to 4 pounds, so about the size of a big mallard. And key characteristics here again include an all-white body with black primary feathers, and they have a very diminutive bill that lacks a defined grinning patch that you can see in the lower left arrow pointing to that Ross goose versus a blue goose in the upper right there, that picture. Next slide, please. Next up is the greater white-fronted goose. This is a species that we don't get a whole lot over here. You can see by the range map, but they do seem to be spreading a little bit westward. You do see them in Illinois and now in Indiana as well. So hopefully someday we'll see more of these here. This species is named for the distinctive white band found at the base of the bill, and dark blotches and bars on the breast give it its nickname, the speckle belly. They're a very, very vocal bird. We call them laughing geese. Next slide, please. And the last of the geese that we have are the brant, the Pacific and Atlantic brant. These are coastal species typically associated with eelgrass beds, but Atlantic brant do show up occasionally on the eastern Great Lakes, as you can see from the distribution map. Key characteristics for brant include an all-black head and chest, and the black neck is decorated with a very elegant white necklace, as you can see there with the arrow. They have a rich brown body contrasted with a bright white rump and pale chest. Next. Our last group of 3 is the swans. And first up is the largest of our North American waterfowl species, the trumpeter swan, which can weigh as much as 25 pounds or more. Key characteristics for trumpeter swans include completely white plumage with a long sloping black bill, with black skin extending all the way to the eye. The tundra swan is very similar in the lower right in appearance to the trumpeter swan, but is much smaller, tipping the scale at 13 to 20 pounds. They also are migratory through Michigan. They don't stay here year-round like trumpeter swans. Key characteristics of this species include all white plumage again with a black bill, but the difference here, besides the size, is a notable yellow eye spot between the eye and the black bill. Very difficult to see. Okay, next slide, please. And our last species that we have here is the mute swan. Mute swans are considered exotic and were introduced to North America in the 1800s to early 1900s. The key characteristics of this species include all white plumage, black legs, an orange bill with a very pronounced black knob, and also the posture. Oftentimes you see them with a long S-shaped neck, and wings are often roofed above the back, making them appear to ride higher on the water than the other swan species. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it over. That's my last slide.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. It's great to see some recognizable names in the audience today. And for folks that I don't know, I'm Patrick Doran. I've worked with the Nature Conservancy here in Michigan for about 20 years, avid birder, and studied some birds throughout my career. Yeah, huge thanks to John. You see all these beautiful pictures, and it kind of like it gets the ideas flowing. You want to go out and see some of these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit today. Just excuse me 1 second. About, okay, what do you do? How do you get out? Where do you start? So some best practices for waterfowl viewing. So next slide, please. I tend to think of these about, it's like, all right, how to prepare, how to spot, what to look for, and where to go. So I'm going to show a few slides on each of these. So first, how to prepare. This is an actual screenshot of my phone. I have an iPhone, but you also have an Android or any other type of phone. And I primarily use a few different apps. So when I think how to prepare, well, first thing I do think it's winter. Bring all the warm things, your clothes, keep the car seat heaters on, or the heat on full blast. Bring some warm coffee or whatever your drink of choice is. Um, I always tend to do a little bit of homework. I do make use of the app eBird almost in a daily manner. It can feel like it's a little bit of mountain to climb and a learning curve, but they have wonderful tutorials on how to use it. So just beginning to use eBird to both track what you find and keep track of it and contribute to a global database of bird distribution information, but also to discover what else other people have found through their alerts or other needs alerts. And again, I can't go into detail in the tutorial today, but they have absolutely wonderful tutorials online. I also tend to have my phone with me, and I have a fancy camera, but just having your phone camera can help document, even if it's a blurry picture, because identifying some of these ducks and geese can easily be done by the shape and doesn't necessarily need a real detailed picture. I also use the app Merlin. Sometimes that helps, especially if birds are making noises. Can identify ducks by sound. I have an identification app. Sibley Birds is the one I use just to confirm. Lots of different ducks, lots of different plumages, slight differences between males and females at times, between the younger birds and the older birds. So I do keep that app. And really importantly, Michigan birding community is highly active on a server called Discord. It's a communications and a messaging server. I think we'll be able to put online. Aaron just added directions on how to join that. It is an absolutely wonderful community of birders, incredibly helpful, incredibly welcoming. There are chat groups there for every county in Michigan, as well as general chats on identification or sharing pictures. There's a women's group on there and a minorities group on there. There's all kinds of wonderful discussions. It's a very active and very helpful and very friendly that can help you. Hey, somebody found this really interesting thing over there or in this county, and you can go and follow up with it. So those are what I usually do to prepare, and I always bring some snacks with me. Snacks are really important. Next slide. So as John talked, waterfowl in particular are pretty interesting in that you can oftentimes the shape is really one unique way of identifying birds. He mentioned a lot, and so it's a ton to go in here again. I can't go into all the detail, but some things that are really important to note, and you might want to do this with a voice app or just a pen and pencil and notepad, is think about always look at the head shape, the length of the neck in relation to the size of the body, the slope of the bill, whether it's a slope or a curvature. All these different things you see here can give you clues into identifying the species. And if you can remember those through a quick note to yourself, when you're looking at your identification guide, you're going to see references to all these different types of things. So I'm always looking at the general shape, the proportions again of the bill to the head, of the neck to the body, the way that holds the head up and down. All those types of things are really important. On the next slide, please. Another thing that I really like to look for in winter, sometimes with birds, we're out there trying to see as many species as we can, or find the rare species, or have the biggest, longest list. I also tend, when I go to birding, just to start to look for really cool behaviors or events or situations. This picture on the right is an aggregation, I believe, of redheads at the Mackinac Straits. These birds are aggregating there in winters by the tens of thousands of individuals. Um, that is really quite utterly amazing when you think of great migrations in the world. We often think of Africa or Pacific salmon in the Northwest US or some of these other great migrations. We sit here in the Great Lakes amid once one of the great migrations of the world as birds are moving through the region from the summer to the winter and the springs and the falls of the years. So they're aggregating by tens of thousands of ducks. It's just absolutely amazing. On the left, there's other cool things you can look for in the winter because birds, especially ducks and geese, are beginning some of their mating rituals. They're starting to pair up. They're starting to be aggressive towards one another. And you start to look, this is just some simple behaviors of mallards. This is from the Cornell birding sites. You know, you'll see these head dips, you'll see these postures, you'll see these courting behaviors. Often these are meant to show off their colors, to show off the robustness or health of the bird, to make them look bigger and more attractive and stronger to one another. And these are really important in terms of the pair bonding. And these birds will form those pairs about this time of the year, and they will maintain those and carry those on into the breeding season. So it's not always the list of most ducks or birds you can put together or the rare ones you see. Sometimes it is about those things, and that's fun. But it's also about understanding what they're doing, why they're doing, how they're aggregating, how they're interacting. So next slide, please. So where do I go? This is a screenshot from the eBird website that shows the top birding locations in Michigan, both by on the left number of people who have visited those and submitted a checklist to eBird, and then on the right by the number of species you'll see. Some of these are on the right are my favorite locations: Whitefish Point in Michigan, Point Mouillet, Tawas Point State Park, where over 300 species of birds have been seen in total over time. Um, I oftentimes make the visit to Tawas in the spring and sometimes in the middle of winter because it's an absolutely beautiful, quiet, amazing place in winter with the ice. Um, Shiawassee National Wildlife Refuge down there, number 7 on the list, and one of my favorite places down there, number 11, is one of TNC's preserves in Erie Marsh, just north of Toledo. So these are all, everything on the right side is absolutely wonderful places to go birding and go visit. And again, you can search these hot spots through eBird. If you move on to the next slide, just a few of, I've put down a few of my favorites on the list, some that are Nature Conservancy preserves and some that aren't. But again, Shiawassee, number 2. Number 1 there is Erie Marsh that I talked about. Acadia Marsh, number 4. Another preserve that TNC helped establish, number 3 at Long Point, up just north of Alpena. And recently some incredible stuff there up at the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, where we see incredible migrations as well. However, you know what? Go to your closest water body. I live in the Lansing area, stone's throw from Lake Lansing here. I oftentimes just stop and take a quick look on the lake on my trips to work or my trips to run some errands, and you never know what shows up. Probably maybe once a year, a white pelican shows up on Lake Lansing, along with the loons and scoters and all kinds of other things you just don't regularly see. So you can always be surprised by a little bit. Next slide, please. As we're talking about cool locations. Really importantly, Audubon has been involved in the identification of important bird areas throughout the U.S., and this is also happening internationally as well. Michigan is home to 103 of these areas that have been identified as important bird areas. And then you have organizations that carry this on, like Audubon or the Nature Conservancy or Ducks Unlimited, that has our priorities that oftentimes include these, but might include some other things too. So this is really the importance, or really the root data that show where it's important for birds, both their migratory areas, their wintering areas, as well as their summer breeding areas as well. So next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it off to Kylie. She's going to talk a little bit about some of these locations, and then she's going to flip it back to me for a little bit more discussion on the importance of wetlands.
Yeah, thanks so much, Patrick. Michigan's wetland wonders are the premier managed waterfowl hunt areas in the state, and these areas were created to provide exceptional waterfowl hunting opportunities and are also managed for both waterfowl habitat for nesting and migration, but also other wetland wildlife. And all of Michigan's managed waterfowl hunt areas double as Audubon important bird areas. These areas are funded by hunting license fees, but they are open for anyone to visit and use most of the year. And just adjacent to Shiawassee Wildlife Refuge, which Patrick mentioned, lies the Michigan DNR Shiawassee River State Game Area, which is one of Michigan's wetland wonders. And while Shiawassee Wildlife Refuge is heavily birded, there are very few eBird checklists for Shiawassee River State Game Area. This area is part of the same wetland complex as the refuge and is home to a similar suite of bird species. And nearby at Fish Point State Wildlife and Game Area, another wetland wonder, is a hotspot for tundra swans and other migratory waterfowl each spring as they congregate there in the thousands. All of Michigan's wetland wonders are excellent birding hotspots that are often off the beaten path. So if you haven't yet been, they're definitely worth exploring. And Michigan is also home to 11 birding trails, which are they highlight several destinations within easy driving distance of each other where you can get some of the best birding in the state. And many birding trail destinations include some of our wetland wonders, wildlife refuges, Audubon important bird areas, and nature preserves. So I will pass it back to Patrick now to talk about the importance of wetland habitats that can be found within these areas.
Thanks. Many years ago, I wrote a little blog on wetlands as kind of the Swiss Army knife of habitat. It does everything for society and does so much. It's just an amazing habitats that we really many state and federal and conservation organizations focus their time and attention and conservation efforts on these great habitats. So next slide, please. We oftentimes think of wetlands, and what's really important here is that we've lost a lot of the historical wetlands across Michigan. And this, sometimes you think of the tragic side of that, but that's also what's allowed us to prosper. That's where we produce our food and our major agricultural exports and providing for the state. That's where a lot of people live, to be close to the water and close to the places they love. So while we've lost a lot of those wetlands, it's moved into productive lands for society and for our communities. However, those losses really require that we pay specific attention to how we further conserve the existing wetlands and restore some areas back into wetlands. So we've lost 60% of historic wetlands across the Great Lakes. However, over the past several years, it's been small gains, and great thanks to efforts like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which has been going on for over 10 years and is providing a great level of funding, federal funding, to restore wetlands. So next slide. As I said, the wetland conservation, we oftentimes think of this in terms of ecosystem services. What are the services that ecosystems provide to society? For organizations like mine, we think of the high biodiversity. It's where a lot of different fish species, bird species, insect species all rely upon habitat, but they also filter nutrients and sediments that improve water quality. They intercept some of the nutrients and sediments from land as they enter in the aquatic system and can filter those out. They buffer our coast against storm events in the Great Lakes and all around the world in our salty environments too. They absorb that wave energy. They absorb those fluctuations in high and low lake levels. They provide lots of recreational opportunities, whether it's fishing or hunting or bird watching or the canoes and the kayaks, those spiritual benefits that folks and the health benefits that folks get from being outside. So next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight as we in the Nature Conservancy think about how we get involved in coastal conservation and wetland conservation. We call this coastal resilience across the Great Lakes. We think about restoring and managing habitats. And we also think about land protection, putting land into some type of conservation ownership or management. But also think about majority of land out there is private land. And we think about how to help landowners, help the counties and municipalities improve some of their regional planning to be able to live and adapt to a very dynamic and changing coast. Our lake levels go up and down. We need to maintain the natural elements of those coastal systems to better handle the fluctuations that we see over time in our environmental processes. One hidden element there is that maintaining the importance of our sediment moving and sand relocation and all these things that give us really dynamic coasts. Our coasts are incredibly dynamic system that change over time, and we have to adapt for that change as opposed to trying to control that change. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to highlight kind of two projects on the Nature Conservancy before I toss it back over to John. And one is our Erie Marsh restoration, which actually was incredibly helpful by Ducks Unlimited, both in the engineering and design and management of the construction activities. We undertook a 12-year, multi-million-dollar wetland restoration effort here at Erie Marsh, both to improve the health of the wetland, to control invasive species like Phragmites, which is a large invasive reed that can kind of choke out habitat in these wetland places. Up on the top right, we installed a fish passage and gave fish access to almost 600 acres of breed or spawning habitat that they had not had access to in over 60 years. And so all these things, when we think about this as a highly engineered system, that's what exists now in many places on the Great Lakes, but we improve the health of that system a lot for migratory birds and especially for waterfowl and shorebirds as they're migrating through. A second project I really wanted to highlight was a recent acquisition on the next slide up in the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan, where we have in the process of newly acquiring over 30,000 hectares of land, including 3 miles of Great Lakes shoreland and lots of wetlands and rivers, and making that heavily available to all of the community in that land. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the incredible habitats that are on this, both the coastal areas of the Great Lakes, which provide really important stopover habitat, but also these incredible just inland wetlands, marshes, lakes that are hidden and provide really unique, especially during migration, but also breeding habitat for a number of our waterfowl. And so I'm going to pass it on, and I think John's going to highlight some pretty cool projects that Ducks Unlimited has done around the state. So thank you.
Yep, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, Ducks Unlimited is a conservation organization that's been around since 1937. And we've done a lot of work here in the state of Michigan, where we have a very active program. We started doing work in 1984 in the U.S. All of the money that used to be raised on the U.S. side of the border for Ducks Unlimited used to flow north to the breeding grounds in Canada. But we recognized that there was important work to be done here in the U.S. as well. And so in 2023, we delivered about 601 acres and invested about $2.3 million in the state. Historically, we've delivered nearly 91,000 acres and invested about $57.8 million statewide. And so you can kind of see the distribution of historic projects in the state. And you might notice if you overlaid these project points with Patrick's wetland loss map, there would probably be pretty good alignment. And so that bird conservation region area 23 that cuts across kind of the lower 2/3 of the state of Michigan, we're very active in that space for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's been tremendous wetland loss there. These were historically important areas. And number two, there's a lot of restoration opportunity there, but primarily because it's a super, super important area to waterfowl, despite all the wetland loss. And so, delivering this work takes a lot of partners. We talk about Ducks Unlimited projects, but we partner on everything we do, just like the Nature Conservancy and Audubon does to deliver this work. And so we partner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Michigan DNR here, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Pheasants Forever, Wild Turkey Federation, TNC, Audubon, county soil conservation districts, you can go down the list. And by doing that, by pooling resources, we can really leverage our money and make it go much, much further. And so that's super important. Recently, we've been scaling our programs through expanding into working lands and ecosystem services, touching on some of the things that Patrick talked about. We've long recognized at Ducks Unlimited that the work that we do benefits far more than waterfowl. It's our mission, waterfowl is our mission, but we understand that it benefits a whole host of other wildlife and fish species, as well as people, storm abatement, water quality, and the like. And so really important work. And so we've been really engaging more in watershed approaches to enhance water quality and wildlife habitat, particularly in Michigan, with things that are going on in Saginaw Bay and Lake Erie with hypoxic areas. Next slide, please. Okay, and so just wanted to highlight a couple of examples of Ducks Unlimited projects, and that includes the White River Celery Flats over in Muskegon County, and then a new state game area called Seneca State Game Area in Lenawee County that's currently being established. Some really exciting work by our biologist, Kylie Rush, on that here in the state. The White River Celery Flats project is located over in Whitehall, Michigan, and we worked with the Muskegon Conservation District for about a decade to protect this former celery farm. Used to produce quite a bit of commodity crop in terms of celery, and we're hoping to restore it to coastal wetland habitat. So talking about some of the stuff that Patrick highlighted there. So we closed on that property in 2022 and are currently starting a project funded by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to remove the old infrastructure, the berms that were in there to basically drain the area for farming, and also the pumps that remove the water from that area. And so our hopes are to reconnect that and open that system back up. And that's going to have benefits for a whole host of species, including fisheries connection as a nursery, as well as waterfowl. So really good stuff. And then we have the Seneca State Game Area. This is a pilot project associated with Michigan DNR and MDARD. And this is to identify wetland restoration opportunities in Michigan's portion of Western Lake Erie Basin to specifically intercept and remove phosphorus from the system before it gets into Lake Erie. You've heard about the Toledo water intake being shut down because of harmful algal blooms, and this is an effort to help address that situation. And so with the DNR and partners, we've currently acquired and protected 300 acres and are working on an additional 200 acres to establish this state game area. And we're in the process of designing the wetland restoration and plan to start construction in late 2025. Water quality monitoring is going to be a strong component of this project to demonstrate the efficacy of wetlands for nutrient uptake and absorbing not only phosphorus, but also nitrogen. And we're hoping that this project will set the stage for a much larger program within the state, much like the H2 Ohio program that you may have heard about, with dedicated funding to address water quality through habitat conservation like this project. And so Really, really cool project. And we're actually engaging in some social science with Michigan DNR associated with this project. This is an area that there's not a lot of positive reception. It's highly agriculturally dominated. And there's not a lot of uptake of Farm Bill conservation programs on properties. And so we're going to do kind of a before, after, and control experiment where we're going to interview landowners and survey them about their attitudes associated with some of this wetland restoration work and the establishment of a state game area, a conservation area in their backyard. And then through time, go back and revisit that after they've had experience with that being in their backyard. So I'm going to pass it off to, I believe, Kylie.
Thank you, John. So in our what we know from the science is that 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970, and more than half of Michigan bird species are at risk of extinction due to climate change. And it's important to understand this science because it helps to guide the work that we're doing here at Audubon. And we are working to bend this bird curve, meaning that what we're seeing right now is this decline in birds, and we're trying to bend that curve to hopefully break even, but better yet to see an increase in our birds. And so at Audubon, we've developed the flight plan, which is a strategic plan for how we're responding to these threats that are facing birds. And as a part of this work, Audubon's vision for the Great Lakes includes ensuring that the waters and lands of this iconic ecosystem remain healthy for the communities of birds as well as people that rely on them for survival. And so Audubon scientists have identified the 12 most important coastal wetland regions across the Great Lakes. And these are the areas that are most important for conservation and restoration for vulnerable marsh birds. And Michigan is home to 4 of these priority regions throughout the state, where we work on the ground to protect birds in the places they need. And our top priorities in Michigan are to ensure strong wetland protection and expansion of expanding access to renewable energies to address climate change. And I'll give a couple of examples of the work that we're doing within a couple of these priority regions in Michigan. So zooming in on what we call the Eastern Lake Michigan priority region, which encompasses part of the west coast of the state. We have Ottawa Sands County Park, and this park is the site of a former sand mining operation that resulted in an artificial lake. And you can see that here in this photo, and just beyond is Lake Michigan. And after the mining operation ceased, the remaining lake, while it appeared pristine, it did not offer any habitat or nutritional value for fish or wildlife. So in 2024, Audubon Great Lakes, in partnership with Ottawa County Parks and Recreation and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and funded by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, completed the restoration of the shoreline of this lake by reshaping the slopes to encourage the establishment of native emergent vegetation, and placed coarse woody debris to offer improved habitat for fish and wildlife. And additionally, 6 acres of interdunal wetlands were restored, and you can see those in this image. This image was taken shortly after the restoration, so it looks a little bare still, but what we hope to see is that emergent vegetation coming back along the shoreline and showing more wetland habitat for birds and wildlife and fish and people. And then within our Detroit River and St. Clair Flats priority region is the St. Clair Flats State Wildlife Area, which comprises over 25,000 acres of bulrush, cattails, and wetland grasses, which are highly supportive of high densities of waterfowl and marsh birds. And St. Clair Flats is home to one of Michigan's few colonies of the state-threatened black tern. Audubon Great Lakes, in partnership with Detroit Bird Alliance and the Michigan DNR, has been conducting extensive monitoring of the black tern population at St. Clair Flats since 2013, which has helped to guide some of the restoration work that's being conducted here. And through the State Wildlife Habitat Grant Program, we had a swamp devil, which you'll see in this photo here. We had that machine come through. It cuts aquatic vegetation. So we had it cut clearings through dense stands of floating invasive hybrid cattail and Phragmites to increase the amount of open water relative to the vegetation. And this will help promote the growth of native emergent vegetation. And this will offer higher quality marsh habitat for not only the black terns, but also other marsh birds and waterfowl. And Ducks Unlimited is also working within this area, and they're working on a pump station. So a pump that will help with water level management of this marsh unit, but also some other adjacent areas of the state game area. And Audubon Great Lakes is in collaboration with Ducks Unlimited for possibilities for additional restoration and enhancement activities in this marsh unit, but as well as elsewhere at St. Clair Flats. So some ways that you can get involved and take action to benefit waterfowl and birds across our state and region. One method is purchasing a migratory bird hunting and conservation stamp, or short-term duck stamp. You can also join or donate local conservation groups. You can inform your state and federal legislatures of the importance of the work that's happening and the funding. You can purchase a Ducks Unlimited or DNR wildlife license plate. You can provide input on some of the management plans that are being developed by Michigan DNR and other agencies. And you can also participate in volunteer community science or stewardship opportunities. And one that's already been mentioned is eBird. That's, believe it or not, we actually do use those data from eBird in some of our science and research that we do to help guide our work. And there's also some upcoming events that you can participate in, such as the Great Backyard Bird Count, which will be next month. Can't believe that that's already coming up here shortly. And then there'll be additional My Birds webinars that you can join in March, May, and July. And there'll be spring birding tours with Michigan DNR and open houses at some of the wetland wonders that we mentioned. And then My Birds ambassadors will be hosting events across the state as well this spring. And with that, I encourage you to follow My Birds, Nature Conservancy, and Ducks Unlimited on social media, or reach out directly to the email address that's provided, and we can help direct you if you have any questions or follow-up that you would like to reach out about. And with that, I'll pass things over to Erin who will facilitate our Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Kylie, John, and Patrick. I know a lot of you asked some questions in the chat, and I know that some of our speakers have already responded to those, but for folks that missed those questions in the chat, I'm going to raise some of those so we can address them chatting, and I know some did not get answered. So the first one is wondering about waterfowl management and wetlands that stands of wild rice are in, and working with First Nation populations. Wondering if any folks have some experience managing wetlands in those circumstances. Yeah, John and Patrick, I see you've unmuted yourselves.
I just put in a quick link there. You can read a little bit more. Yeah, the wild rice is gaining much more attention over the past several years with the tribes throughout the region, and has been a focus of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So there's a lot of great effort going into both restoring some of these wild rice areas and then sharing the lessons on the successful management of those areas. Over to you, John.
Yeah, GLICNIC is very, very involved in that. And for the life of me, I'm going to mess up what that acronym stands for. Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife something. When I was a regional biologist in Wisconsin for Ducks Unlimited, we supported quite a bit of work with them, doing beaver management, but also reseeding. We're involved in some restoration of wild rice and monitoring in Green Bay. I don't know about Michigan per se. We have a very active program in Minnesota for sure. We do about 25 to 30,000 acres of enhancement, and a lot of that again is beaver management. They mess up the hydrology on some of these stands, and so that's the kind of action that we're involved in there, and reseeding as well. But yeah, Callie Rush would probably be your best resource for in-state here in Michigan ongoings in terms of wild rice.
Okay, great, thanks. And then Kylie, I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts on wild rice management and some of the work we've done at Audubon Great Lakes with black terns.
Absolutely, yeah. Tawas Lake is a prominent site that comes to mind. It's one of the sites of the black tern monitoring and research that we've been conducting, and we've had communication with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe there and around their management of the wild rice. And we've been involved in some community outreach and engagement in the area to help inform stakeholders of Tawas Lake of the importance of those wild rice stands for not only the black terns, but other marsh birds and waterfowl. Additionally, we have communication with the Sioux tribe. And we've been in collaboration with them for Minnescong Bay, another site of our black tern research. And they have stands of wild rice there that they've been managing. And we also have there's some wild rice down at St. Clair Flats as well. So we've been seeing how we can go about furthering our understanding of that wild rice growth and how we can better manage to encourage that wild rice growth for the black terns and marsh birds and waterfowl.
Great, thank you so much. And then Patrick, there were a lot of follow-up questions about Erie Marsh, so just wanted to give you an opportunity to share your responses with everybody, making sure that they know how to access the area.
Yeah, so first note, the preserve is closed from September through December. So open from January through August. It's a little bit difficult to find and get to. So you might be driving down the road and it doesn't quite look like you're going to end up in a preserve. And when you do get there, we lease the program for been a long-term lease for since the 1980s with the local hunt club. So when you get there, there's a small parking area, but you'll see buildings and you'll see a work shed with equipment. So that's normal, but there's a nice little parking area with some signage. There is a gate. Sometimes that gate is closed. It is still okay to access the preserve if that gate is closed. Park outside the gate, but please park in an area on the side of the road. There's a private property next door. There is the gate. Don't block that. But you are welcome to access during those times and locations. Winter can be quite interesting time, especially if there's still some open water. If it's frozen, that's probably not the best time to visit. But you can see a variety of birds there. Once it starts hitting April and May, it's an absolutely spectacular time to visit the preserve. I included a PDF there, link that shows the map. Just absolutely incredible place. You can go out there in the spring and see dozens of bald eagles at a time. You can see hundreds of white pelicans and then all kinds of other great waterfowl, migratory birds. So again, it's the road doesn't look quite like the easiest road. You're going the right space, but you are. And then just see someone ask some questions. Thank you. And you can always reach out to our main Nature Conservancy office here in Michigan with any other details or any problems.
Great, thanks, Patrick. We also had someone mention their love for photographing waterfowl, but since some areas are difficult to access, even with a 600mm lens, they also fly drones and was wondering what our thoughts are on using drones to photograph or video species without disturbing them. So I'll take a first stab at this one and then open it up to others. But I guess there are certain species that are more sensitive to the presence of drones than others. So osprey, for example, are one of those species that are very sensitive. So just be extremely mindful of how close you're getting. Definitely keep an eye on the bird's behavior if it's changing. I would not recommend getting close to any nests. And then even some state parks and wildlife refuges don't allow the use of drones. So I think it's a really good idea to always check with the land managers before you head out. Yeah. And I'll open that up. I know Michigan DNR has some information online about use of drones as well and recommendations and guidelines for that, but opening it up to others.
Yeah, I guess I could jump in just a little bit from my perspective. I'm actually a waterfowl research scientist for Ducks Unlimited, conservation planner, but good points, Aaron, on access. You definitely don't want to go out to a state wildlife area, a waterfowl production area, or a federal refuge and not have permission. Usually requires a use permit of some sort. So make sure you take care of that. You don't want to get in trouble with conservation agents on that front. We have been doing quite a bit of research using drones, particularly during the breeding period. We had a research project in Iowa where we were looking at breeding pair distributions and also doing brood surveys. Waterfowl are in general fairly tolerant. We actually did some experimentation with American black ducks, which are among our wariest waterfowl. And we're able to drop a quadcopter probably within 15, 20 feet of them, and they really didn't flush. And we're doing some brood experiments out for brood studies with eastern mallards and black ducks right now using that technology. So I think it may vary by time of year, certainly species, and you definitely want to be sensitive to not disturbing these birds in a way or during a sensitive time of the year either. So anyway, anybody else wants to jump in?
Just the
Yeah, I'll
importance
just
of site-based regulations is going to be variable from state to private to the federal lands. Many federal lands prohibit drones. So just being incredibly aware of the local rules and regulations.
absolutely. I was just going to elaborate on that. Be mindful of the rules and regulations. As a U of A pilot myself, I would recommend looking into getting your license to become further educated on operation of UAVs and be respectful even if drones are allowed in the area. Be respectful of adjacent landowners, and while being mindful of the birds' behavior, also be cognizant of other wildlife that might be present and the habitat as well. Yeah, I think that's all that I would add.
Wonderful, thanks all. And with that, we're out of time. So thank you all so much for spending this lunch hour with us. We'll save any questions we weren't able to answer. And we hope you have a great time. Happy winter birding, everyone. Take care all.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
all.
much, everybody.